Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Mark Friedman. Mark is an author, and he's come on to talk about his recent book, Come Now, Let Us Reason Together, Uncovering the Torah's Liberal Value. Hi, Mark. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Um, okay, so I'm going to be fully honest here. I just recently started a job up at a remote site, and I'm there 2 weeks, and I'm here 2 weeks. So in the 2 weeks since we booked this, um, I was up at this remote site in northern Quebec, and unfortunately, I did not get a chance to order your book or to read it. So I'm going to muddle through as best as I can. So, with that being in mind, if you would just want to maybe start off with like the premise of your book and what you were hoping to like convey with it.
Sure. Well, the main message that I was trying to convey in the book is that Judaism is, I think, a largely misunderstood religion. I know that sounds kind of like a very large claim to make, but I think most people working in this field would concede that Jewish theology is a bit underdeveloped. And so I think there's a misunderstanding that is along the lines of Judaism is this really old fashioned religion. Uh, there's a lot of horrible commandments in the Torah, uh, capital punishment for victimless crimes and genocide. And therefore, we just have to kind of muddle through and either go with the Orthodox viewpoint, which is these horrible commandments are just beyond our understanding as finite human beings, and who are we to question God? And on the other extreme, there's kind of the very liberal, in the modern sense of the term, liberal streams of Judaism that just say, well, you know, those are things we just have to disregard. We know better, so we're not doing those things. We're going to take the parts of the Torah and the other books of the Jewish Bible that we like, and we'll just disregard the parts that we don't like as being anachronistic and no longer relevant. And I'm trying to steer a middle course in this book and say there's a way to hold on to all of the Torah and not to pick and choose, and to just understand the the context and kind of the philosophical underpinnings of the Torah that are often neglected. And the argument I make is that if you look at the Jewish Bible through the lens of Kantian moral autonomy and Karl Popper's critical rationalism, it becomes clear that these foundations of liberal thought, liberal now being used in the classic sense of the John Stuart Mill and John Locke, that kind of liberal, if you view it through that lens, you'll see that the liberalism is there in the text. And so it licenses us to make changes, not in some arbitrary, random way, but as part of the whole thrust of the Jewish Bible is that way. So there's nothing to apologize for. There's nothing that we have to excise, and there's nothing that we have to apologize for.
A couple of things on that. One, I just want to clarify something because when you said that there was not a lot of theological study in Judaism, I mean, okay, I'm an outsider looking in, and on top of that, I'm an atheist. So, but I mean, aren't there whole like schools of thought? Like I mean, you have all the commentaries on the Torah, then you have the commentaries on the commentary. I just like to hear you. Maybe I misunderstood, and maybe I'm misquoting. But like I thought you said that there was not enough scholarship or theological scholarship in Judaism, and I'm just kind of curious about that. Like I said, from my understanding, I mean, there's whole schools devoted to it, and it's
No,
There's
you're absolutely right about that. But that's not theology in the sense I'm using it. That's the official version of Judaism. I mean, that is the foundations. Those are the bricks that you have to use to build whatever wall you're going to build and ultimately live under. But theology, in the sense of struggling with these difficult issues that I tried to describe, of how you reconcile. There are things in the Torah that are absolutely beautiful that nobody, I think, know, that are foundations to civilization, and that I don't think anybody has a quarrel with. It says in the Torah, treat your fellow as yourself, the golden rule.
yeah.
There's also all kinds of obligations to go beyond that, but to actually assist and help your fellow Jew. So this is a given. This is all this stuff that you're mentioning is a given, and I've made it my business to become quite familiar with it. But it's not theology in the sense that I'm using it of trying to reconcile the beautiful things that we find in Judaism with some of the ugly things. How can these things both be true? How can it both be true that Judaism has these beautiful things about how you treat people, and treat them with respect and all this stuff, but we're going to execute people for Sabbath desecration? How do you square that circle? That's the sense in which I'm using theology. I don't think very many scholars have tried to go give a coherent answer to that type of question.
Okay. Okay. No, thanks for clarifying that. Because like I said, it just, I just wanted to clear that up. The second thing is the whole liberal values thing, the John Locke, the John Stuart Mill. Again, going back to the study that's done. I mean, there's places like Al Azhar that do study of Islam, and you have Qom in Iran for Shias that do that study. But it's from what I read and what I see and like this discourse I see around Judaism, it just seems a lot more in depth. Um, Whether or not I believe the underlying divinity to it or not, but like just the thought seems different. And it was something I'd read, and it was with Abraham outside of Sodom and Gomorrah arguing with God.
Yes.
And now, you can go into Islam a little bit and say, oh, well, Muhammad argued down to five prayers instead of, I think it started at 40 or something like that. I'm going to get that number wrong. But it's not the same thing, right? I mean, here God was saying, I'm going to burn down these two cities and kill everyone in it. And Abraham's trying to, you know, save some lives. So it was that, like I said, it was something I was reading that was just talking around Judaism and about it. And it was like that argumentative aspect you don't see really in Islam. Well, you don't see it too much in Christianity, and you certainly don't see it in Islam. So, like, if I was going to try to square, John Stuart Mill, square on liberty with the Torah, I would maybe come at it from that angle.
Well, that is actually remarkably, you've hit on one of the main arguments in the book. Yeah, it actually goes beyond Abraham. When God first appears to Abraham, he tells him, "Yeah, there are these cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. I think there were five in total, whose wickedness is beyond repair." He basically just announces that to whoever's reading the Bible. But then God says, "Well, since I've chosen Abraham to be my representative to spread monotheism, I better make it clear to Abraham that this isn't as unjust as I think." As he may think. So then Abraham comes on the scene and says, "Okay, you're going to destroy these wicked communities, but what if I can find 50 righteous people? Won't you save these communities, although they may be incredibly evil? Won't you save them for the 50 righteous people?" And God says, "Sure, I will." And then Abraham says, "What about 40?" And God says, "Sure, I will." And it gets down to 10, and then the message is across that God will save it, basically for anybody, but there aren't any people like that. There aren't any righteous people. And then, sort of remarkably to me, God says, um, I'm going to go down and verify this with my own eyes. Now, that's bizarre because an omniscient God, why wouldn't he just know?
Mhm.
Okay. But my understanding of that is that the author of the Torah is using God as a model. In other words, if even an almighty person, before doing something drastic, wants to verify the evidence with their own eyes, why won't we do the same thing? Why shouldn't it be on us to do the same thing? So the author is using God as kind of a model of justice, even though God is not human, but the understanding, the person writing it is trying to humanize God for instructional purposes. And if I could just continue, it's way more than Abraham. I mean, you're right, but Moses is much more um, willing to argue with God and even to persuade God, which is another mind-boggling thing, which I describe in the book. So just to give one example, there are many, but to give one example, Moses is up learning the Torah with God on Mount Sinai, and it says that he's there for 40 days to learn all the intricacies of the Torah. And the Jews miscalculate the 40 days, and so they think he's abandoned them. So of course there's the infamous story of the golden calf. They build this golden calf, this idol, which is, obviously against God's law, and they're going to worship the idol or at least use it as an intermediary to get to God. And so God tells Moses, "Hey, look what I see going on down there. I'm going to destroy this entire people. I'm going to destroy all the Israelites, every one of them, and I'm going to start over with you, Moses, as the new Abraham, and we'll just go back to that point and rebuild Judaism from there." And Moses argues God out of it. Moses says, he gives him two arguments, and God says, "Well, you're right. I'm just going to destroy the ringleaders, and the vast majority of people get off the hook." So, I mean, again, I don't think people appreciate just how liberal that is, that you can out argue God. Now, again, I don't think the author of that really believes that literally Moses out argued God, because they're not giving up the notion of God as omniscient. But again, the author of that text is using this as an example that, okay, you should be open to argument. If you've made up your mind to do something, but if somebody comes to you with a good argument about why that's unjust, you need to listen to them. And there's many more examples of this in the Jewish Bible about confronting and changing God's mind, which is again part of the story about why Judaism is liberal in the old sense of that term.
Again, like if I compare it to Islam, Islam has built into it this idea of bid'ah, which is innovation in the faith, and they want no bid'ah, right? So you can discuss, should homosexuals be thrown off the 10th floor of a building or the 15th floor, and to kill them. But to discuss, should we stop doing that, that is actually performing bid'ah. So there is none of that reconciliation in there. Also, I mean, if you take a look at the Christianity, there is no render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar and render unto God that which is God's. It isn't that, it's not in the Quran to look at it that way. But on the Judaism side, I mean, there's nothing like that really, but there is, like, again, from what I've read and listening to some people speak, so if the temple is rebuilt, and there's a certain faction that go along with this, if the temple is rebuilt, then you have to follow halakhic law to the letter, and that means then punishing people who work on the Sabbath. You know,
Right. No, that
uh,
that is there are a lot of Orthodox Jews. In fact, I would say the mainstream Orthodox view is exactly that. And I sort of began my story about my book with that the Orthodox just say we can't question God. We mere mortals can't question God. And so whatever is in the Torah, we're going to go along with, even if it's horrible, even if through secular eyes, it seems horrible, we're going to go along with that. But I think that's a misreading of the basic Jewish text. See, what happened in Judaism There's a lot of history in Judaism,
Yeah.
but okay. So rabbinic Judaism is generally defined as the period of time between when the Second Temple was destroyed in 70 of the Common Era till the closing of the Babylonian Talmud, which is the authoritative Talmud, the closing, the finalization of that Talmud in either the early 7th century of the Common Era or the late 6th century. There's a lot of debate about when exactly it was closed. But the scholars agree that it was basically in that time frame. Okay, so my argument is that if you look at the Judaism that the rabbis of the Talmud discussed and accepted, um, it's liberal in the classical sense. But Judaism changed between um, that moment, the 7th century, let's say, and the Enlightenment. You had a bunch of things happen that moved it in a regressive way, and probably the most clear cut of these. I mean, just to mention three, is Christianity, Islam, and then what's known in Judaism as the Karaite heresy. And to digress just a little bit, in the 8th and 9th centuries, there arose a movement in what is now um, Iran and Iraq that said every Jew, every educated Jew can interpret the written Torah as they like. We don't we don't accept the authority of the oral law. The oral law is the interpretations of the Bible that were handed down by the rabbis. Like, how do you observe Shabbat? Okay, the Torah is very clear. It says, honor Shabbat and keep it holy. But it says literally nothing about what that means in practice. How do you do that? So the rabbis spent like spilt an ocean of ink, so to speak, about fleshing that out. How exactly do you do it the right way? And the Karaites came along and said, well, that's all well and good, but as educated Jews, we can all read the Torah and decide this for ourselves. And then the rabbis, those who succeeded, who followed rabbinic Judaism, said, no, 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 you can't, because the oral law, all these traditions that the rabbis came up with, those were given also by God to Moses on Sinai. So in reality, there are two Torahs. There is the written Torah that we read from in our services, and then there's the oral Torah, which is found in the Talmud and related sources. And so basically, they elevated these oral traditions not to oral traditions that could be changed, like in a legal system, a common law legal system that could be changed over time. They said these came from God, so we can't touch these, which is why you then have this really rigid, dogmatic, illiberal version of Judaism that you're referring to. When we rebuild it and we reconstitute our high court, then we're going to go right back to the old days. And if you desecrate the Sabbath, we're going to execute you. If you're a homosexual, we're going to execute you. We're going to do all these things that to secular eyes seem absolutely monstrous. But my argument in the book is that's not the authentic Judaism. The authentic Judaism, the Judaism that was reinvented after the destruction of the temple, is liberal in the sense I've described and is flexible and will adapt. And so what these Orthodox extremists, I'll call them, that's not the real Judaism. That's not the true Judaism. And that's I don't write the book to castigate Orthodox Judaism, but it just sort of falls out of the book. I mean, if authentic Judaism is liberal, pluralistic, and tolerant, then obviously what you're doing is not authentic Judaism.
Okay. Yeah, no, no. Like I said, I'm just trying to square, what I've read, or what I've heard with, what you're talking about here. Okay, I'm gonna come at it a slightly different way. I don't know if you read David Bernstein's book, Woke Anti-Semitism.
I actually listened to your podcast with him, so I haven't read the book, but I'm familiar with what he's saying.
Uh, Now, he mentions progressive Jewish organizations, and I've seen some up here in Canada, and again, like I said, outsider looking in, but would you say that's taking it a bit too far? Like, I mean, or do you like I consider that stuff illiberal. So, when I hear people saying woke liberals, I'm like, that makes no sense because that in itself I find illiberal. So I'm wondering if you have a sense of that or if you're worried about anything like that, like just going like overcorrecting too much.
Oh yeah, I mean, I share 100% David Bernstein's perspective on that. It is illiberal. You have right now. It's like the parties have changed places, and it used to be that there was a lot of bigotry and anti-Semitism and illiberal racism, illiberalism generally on the far right and the demagogues of the deep south and all this. And now we've swung I mean, there's still these racist anti-Semites on the extreme right, but they don't hold the levers of power. They don't command the commanding heights of academia and the media. That's all on the left. And it is totally illiberal because, I mean, a foundation of liberalism is that you treat everybody equally. Everybody has equal rights. It's not that, we don't divide the world into victims and oppressors. We judge every individual on their own merits. I mean, there's no more basic principle of liberalism than that, it seems to me. And so, yeah, when you start saying, hey, violence against a Hasidic Jew is justified because they're part of the ruling class that's oppressing everybody, nothing could be more illiberal than that. So yeah, as I said, I'm trying to find the middle ground here.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes it just feels like, people are going from one extreme to the other, and it's just, the best way I heard it explained actually was James Lindsay, and he was talking about a centrifuge. And so you put a chemical solution in a centrifuge and you just spin it and it just pushes everything apart. And it just seems to me that there's very few that are trying to go back into the center. They're just getting further and further apart just as a reaction, what they perceive coming from the other side. I mean, I love the idea of trying to come in from the center and like trying to reconcile those two extremes, but maybe I'm just being pessimistic. But right now, and it changes day to day sometimes, but it just seems like I mean, like, you're taking on like you're kind of replacing Sisyphus here at some point. It's just,
I know what you're talking about for sure. I mean, I don't, I don't have much of a megaphone. I'm kind of an obscure
yeah,
philosopher out here with a book on Jewish theology. But what I'm trying to do, and maybe this is part of the solution. I think it's part of the solution for Jews at least. But I think a lot of Jews are put off from their religion and find an alternative religion in kind of this virtue signaling wokeism. Look how, righteous I am and how I care about the poor and blah, blah, blah. Because they've come to believe, and it's understandable how they came to believe this, that the people who dress in the long black coats and the black hats and the women who are content to serve their men and have, 8 kids, and who observe Jewish law rigorously, which is an understatement. Their focus is on observing Jewish law to the last, scintilla, an obsession with ritual, that these people are the authentic Jews. And so if you're not a member of that movement, then you're practicing a fake Judaism, an ersatz Judaism. And so people are put off. Well, what's the point of being Jewish? I'm never going to be a real Jew. I'm never going to be a good Jew. So I might as well be something else. But what I'm arguing is no. You can be a good Jew by being, tolerant and pluralistic and innovative. I mean, and you can care for your fellow Jew or your fellow Gentile. That's all fine within the context of Judaism, that's the authentic Judaism, and it's not this obsession with every detail of ritualism. Now, I think to be Jewish, you at the minimum have to have faith that God exists. Notice I say faith, I don't say belief in some propositional sense. I'm a philosophical agnostic in the sense that I don't think there's a decisive argument either way for God's existence or non-existence. It's not an empirical question. You can't settle it by the tools that we usually use. Um, but you can believe, you can have faith. You can be a person of faith even if you don't have that belief, which is what I consider myself to be. I have faith that God exists. I don't know that he exists. I don't have proof that he exists, but I can have faith that he exists. And because you have faith that at least some ritual observance is, I think, normal. I mean, according to the Torah, God did all these miraculous things for us, leading us out of Egypt, giving us the Torah, protecting us as we wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Whether you take that literally or not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we're here. God, if you have faith that God exists, then you have to, I think, believe that God is capable or interested in interacting with the world. And if you think about the history of Judaism, that for thousands of years we've been persecuted and murdered and slaughtered just for the sin of being Jewish, and yet we're still here. Not only are we still here, but miraculously, one could think, it's not a proof, but one could think miraculously we're back in Israel, speaking our old language, um, governing ourselves, having Jerusalem as a de facto capital, and we're back where we started from. So I think kind of a minimum of ritual is required, but it's not what the Orthodox do. It's not this all encompassing um, drive to have every ritual be perfect. It's more important that you have the ethics perfect, or as close as a human being can. That's more important than having the ritual exactly right. So Jews should be encouraged, I think, hopefully, the book would encourage them to reconnect with their Judaism and see that really it's a beautiful thing. It's not something they have to run away from because of all these horrible commandments.
I think for an average Jewish person, it would be easier than for an average Muslim. And I keep, like, this is again just a guess on my part, but I think if you actually polled the Jewish population, you would have more who were nominally Jewish than if you could say something along the same lines for Islam. And I think in Islam, you
Sure.
get, it's harder to break free from that. So yeah, I mean, to reach that section of the Jewish population, I don't think you'd have an issue. I think where you would have an issue with your message is, again, you mentioned the Orthodox, but if you go on the other side, like the really, really, progressive organizations that have glommed on to, like, like the virtue signaling, like you were saying, um, I think those two would be your toughest market.
Oh, absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. The Orthodox, if they're anything, they're extremely dogmatic. And they don't want to hear anything that conflicts with their viewpoint, which is why in most Haredi, I say ultra Orthodox because that's sort of the secular label, but the more, I guess, accurate label within the context of Judaism might be Haredi, which means extremely committed to observing the details of Jewish law and isolating themselves from secular influences. So that's why their children, at best, have like an elementary school education in English and math and science and literature. They make sure that they're now. I'm going to differentiate in a second, but I'm speaking about the Haredi. They make sure that their children are essentially trapped in that worldview. Because let's say you wake up at the age of 18 and say, you know what, this doesn't sound right to me. I'm interested in the outside world. Well, what are you going to do? You have a fourth grade education. I mean, what job are you going to try to get? And so they're insular because they don't want anybody leaving the fold. Now, I said differentiate the modern Orthodox, which is the people you run into who are doctors, lawyers, architects, business people. They follow all the Jewish law, so you won't see them from Friday night through Saturday night. You won't see them on the street or, at the workplace or, working out at the gym or anything like that because they're observing Shabbat in the Orthodox way. But they have made themselves comfortable with the secular world. So they send their kids to college. The kid wants to go to college, Harvard, whatever. That's fine. And that's liberal because then if the child says, I like Orthodox Judaism. I've seen the other side. I like Orthodox Judaism. I'm gonna stay Orthodox. Or the child says, you know what, I want to be more secular, and so I'm not going to be Orthodox. I'll still be Jewish, but I'm not going to observe these rituals. I'm going to go, be a successful, Elon Musk or something. So the modern Orthodox I regard as liberal because of this, because they're respecting their children's moral autonomy. Now, the other side of the coin, the extreme woke, I mean, they've been, in my opinion, they've been brainwashed by their. It's now gotten to high school, even junior high school. Well, what their teachers have told them and taught them about systematic oppression and classes of people who are privileged by power, the white power and the disadvantage of colored people, all this stuff they've absorbed for many years. And so I don't have a real way to break through to them other than, plead with them to read my book or some similar book that gives them a better feel for their religion so they might be attracted to it. I mean, religious people resist the woke um, doctrine, fantasy, because there's something about religion that emphasizes personal responsibility. It's not, you're not privileged or unprivileged. We're all equal in the eyes of God, and we all have the same responsibilities in terms of dealing with our fellow people, regardless of their skin color. And we should all be prepared to be accountable when we do something that is really bad. So, I mean, religion, once you get into religion, it kind of inoculates you in a certain way from the real wokeism because its teachings are, I think, substantially inconsistent with that.
Yes and no, but okay. So I studied a lot of I only got into reading about the woke stuff because I got called a white supremacist for criticizing Islam, and I just like, what the hell, right? So, um, I read up into it, but the first organizations outside of academia and you know, government, like the administrative side of government, that really got taken over by this stuff was the Southern Baptist Convention. Like you had it going into Protestant churches. And so it started making a postmodern Protestantism. And they're actually having huge problems with that now in Catholicism as well. Um, Again, you've had progressive Jewish organizations, and so I don't think that there's any one panacea for this stuff. Part of the problem, I take it, like you mentioned, oh, it's going into junior, middle school and stuff. It's as of 2017, there were 18 states that had this stuff K through 12. Um, there was a school in 2015. This is a private school in New York City called the Dalton Academy. And there were other schools doing it, but they became famous because I think it charged something like $45,000 a year.
Right.
K through 8 academy. They took kids starting in the third grade and all the way up to the eighth grade. They split them up for 45 minutes a week into, quote unquote, affinity groups. They sent
Yeah.
letters home, asked parents what race do your kids identify as, especially if they're biracial. Um, Within a few months, you had these little kids spouting off. some of the most vile ethno-national stuff. I know in like the Dalton Academy, then something that's related to it, which was the Fieldstone Academy, there were local Jewish parents who were suing the school because of the rise in anti-Semitism that was coming from these kind of programs. Um, so it's not, you know, I call them woke madrasas. Like you're no, but you're in, like not every kid that goes to a madrasa comes out as ISIS or the Taliban, but enough of them are like if you take a look at the polls in the UK, and you're going to soon start seeing that in Canada and the US because of our immigration policies. But in the UK, I think it's definitely the majority, but I want to say it's close to like 90% of UK Muslims think homosexuality should be criminalized. That's the kind of thing you're going to have where they kind of just expect this as the norm, and that's the lens they're going to use for everything. So I know there's a whole bunch of stuff about the woke right, whatever. I'm not going to get into that term, but like you have this far right, and when I first came back from overseas and I saw everything that was going on, I said you're going to have overcorrections. You're going to go too far in the other direction, and you're going to be left unable to defend yourself. And that's exactly what's happening. Like, I mean, you have this ethno-nationalism rising on the right, which, we've seen where that goes. Um, and it's happening as a direct result of this. With the woke, I mean, I have a problem with fundamentalist Islam. I have a problem with a lot of, tenets of Islam, but it's the woke that have cut out the proper conversation on it. They're the ones who've been screaming since 9/11 about Islamophobia. And, so you couldn't have that conversation. So that's like I said, they're creating a monster on the other side. And then on the civil liberties side, there was a quote Hitchens always used from A Man for All Seasons, and he was, Thomas More looks at the Inquisitor from the Church of England, and he said, like, you'd cut down all the laws to catch the devil. And he said, what would you do when the devil turned around and all the laws are gone? And so you've got this from a progressive side. Now you're seeing idiots like Nick Fuentes getting a huge boost, and I know he's been around for a while. I mean, Tucker Carlson's finally showing his insanity. I mean, you know, Candace Owens has always been a kook, but these people are pushing back in a horrific overcorrection. And then the ACLU is not fit for purpose anymore. Who's going to defend you?
Well, one of your prior guests, Greg Lukianoff, is trying to step into the void. But I am familiar with what you're saying, and I agree with it. I mean, each extreme brings out the worst from the other extreme. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I wish I had a magic bullet. Unfortunately, I don't. I mean, I will just revert to one thing you said. But for the I don't want to call them, let's not call them fundamentalists. Let's just say traditional Christians, the Christians who still take their religion seriously and are familiar with its texts, which thankfully, from my perspective, thankfully includes the Old Testament, what they call the Old Testament. They're at least familiar with the history. They know that the land of Israel was the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, not just at the time of Jesus, but Jesus didn't just pop out of nowhere. I mean, that the Old Testament was written hundreds of years before Jesus. And so at least the Christians who have studied these texts know that it's not settler colonialism. The Jews being in Israel is not settler colonialism. What is settler colonialism was Islam chasing everybody else out of the Middle East when it arose and then trying to conquer Europe. So, they're at least familiar with the history. And so, but for the Christian right, Israel would be in a world of hurt because, I mean, there's 15 million Jews in the world, something like that, and approximately 6 million in the US. And, there's 330 million people in the US. So we're like a drop in the ocean. Politically, we can't vote our way to anything. And so, from the point of view of a Jew who believes Israel has a right to exist, I can only say thank God for those Christians. Now, I'm not saying that I support what they think in all,
Yeah,
realms, but just for purposes of keeping Israel alive, uh, I got to be grateful.
I'm worried at it from another standpoint is what's going to happen overall. Because if you get that explosive overcorrection coming from the right to what the left was doing, I think you leave average people with, a really horrible choice of which form of totalitarianism are you going to back. And it's, that's my biggest worry about a lot of this stuff. Like there's individual pockets of things that different people are working on, which I applaud all of them. But like I said, for me, there's that big, huge, like if the dam gives way, then it's, people are going to line up and choose between one authoritarianism or another.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it scares me too. I mean, I think that the things you just laid out explain the rise of Trump because people just, and I'm not a big fan, let me just say up front, but he's giving voice to this anti-woke pushback. I mean, men shouldn't compete in women's sports. I mean, to me,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like I'm saying to me that's two and two equals four. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just old fashioned that we should do away with all the DEI departments because they're just an excuse for racial preference just going in the other direction instead of being just directed against blacks, which was horrible. We're now going to direct it against Asians trying to get into Harvard and against, Jewish people trying to get into Harvard. So we're just going to replace it. And those are not even white people, really. It's just they're not the right color. They're a different color, but they're not the right color. And I think people, your average person, if you ask them, should people be judged on their character or on their skin tone, paraphrasing Martin Luther King, I think most of them would say, well, everybody should be judged on their own merits and demerits. So I think Trump, he is an authoritarian and he does present a danger, but I think he is the product of a lot of resentment about things being pushed down your throat that the average person doesn't hold with.
oh,
And then who knows what replaces Trump? I mean, we could have, it's not at all beyond the realm of a possibility that we have somebody like AOC or Mamdani, because they seem to be the golden politicians of the left right now. And whatever
yeah,
you think of Trump and his authoritarian streak, I'm pretty sure that what would follow from the left would put him to shame from the authoritarian perspective.
yeah. But I mean, that's another thing. Like with the Trump. Oh well, Trump is reaction to it. People said that in 2016 when he got elected. And before the inauguration, instead of trying to say, hey, why don't we fix our side? It was all Trump all the time. Now, yes, 2020, Biden won, but it took a global pandemic. And there was that lovely Time article about, oh, there was this cabal of, I forget the exact term they used, of, reporters and blah, 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 that were trying to force the election. If you took all that to beat the guy, then you didn't really win. Then he comes back in 2024 and wins again. Um, like nothing was done. Okay, the last election, I've been saying this for the last three U.S. elections. I said, I'm a Canadian, so I can't vote. But if I was an American, I would vote down ticket. Like I would, like, no one, like neither Trump nor Clinton, neither Trump nor Biden, or Trump and Biden again in 20, or Trump and Harris, I guess, 2024. Um, you know, not one of them was worth a vote. And especially the last election, I had all these people coming across my timelines on my social media saying stuff like Trump is going to attack the democracies and attack the Constitution. You have to vote Democrat. And they were saying this after the debate, and I'm like, seriously? You know, Biden's brain was mush. Who is running this show? So you want to vote for a party that, you know, shat all over your democratic institutions and use your constitution as toilet paper. You want to elect them because they're going to preserve democracy. I'm like, where are your goddamn principles? And so there is that on the left too. Like there's a willful blindness. They don't want to look at their own blemishes. I'm sorry, but there is no way in any good conscience someone could have said, vote Democrat because they're going to protect the democracy. Like I lost a lot of respect for people when they said stuff like that. And it just, I mean, like, give me a break. They're not, they
Yeah, I
didn't.
hear you.
So, and I'm like, again, I'm like you. I don't think Trump deserved to vote. I think the guy's erratic. I think he's unpredictable. I don't think he's the right temperament to be president. He caught onto a zeitgeist and he's going along with it, but he's doing it with like a wrecking ball, and some of the stuff needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully. But yeah, like I said, it's a little insane.
right. I have friends in Canada. My on my father's side, all my ancestors started off in Canada, and then a lot of them gradually moved to the U.S. when there was this big wave of persecution in Russia back at the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century. Everybody in my on my father's side moved. They moved, and one of the few places that would have them would be Canada. So I have friends. I've been there many times. I know the place. I can just say I hope that when Canadians look at our politics and they're horrified, as well, they have a right to be, and they think, okay, how did this horrible, maniacal, unfit madmen get to be president? I just want them to notice, hey, the alternative wasn't very good either. I mean, you'd be saying something equally bad if a majority of us had voted for Harris and we were now 8 months into her presidency. You'd be saying the same. How could this nitwit, this person who can't put together a complete sentence about any topic, who speaks word salad, how did this lady end up being president of the United States? It was like there was no good choice. I mean, it was going to be a bad person no matter who we voted. So just have a little bit of understanding of what the U.S. voters were faced with before just throwing up your hands.
Yeah. Look, I mean, like I said, that's why I don't think either of them was worth voting. And again, some of that willful blindness. Oh, the Democrats aren't that woke. Sorry, they started off the DNC with a land acknowledgement, which is straight post colonialism, and that's where you get the whole settler colonial stuff from Israel. Um, then you had then they segregated the caucuses. You had a black caucus, a Hispanic caucus, an Asian caucus. I mean, give me a break.
I
Like
know.
it's just it's that willful blindness on the left. Like I'm like, look at your own flaws and just
Right.
I'm not saying there isn't stuff on the right. Like I don't care right, left, liberal, conservative, whatever. It's just what are your beliefs? What what are the what's the lens you're going to use to solve issues? That's what I'm more concerned about than any of the other stuff because there's what 330, 340 million people in the US, and if you ask them their definition of liberal and conservative, you get 330, 340 million definitions because the terms have lost all meaning right now.
Right. Unfortunately, I think you can trace a lot of this back to the educational system and the media. I mean, the level of ignorance uh, among our voters about basic constitutional principles and basic ideas about free speech. I mean, free speech is engendered. There is a an alarming percentage of Americans who think that hate speech is is not protected under the Constitution and shouldn't be protected under the Constitution, when in fact they're wrong on both counts. I mean, the first thing that a totalitarian government will do is shut down free speech and say, well, that's all hate speech. We're not going to have this debate because the people that oppose me are all, speakers of hate. And so, I mean, I mean, we still have the First Amendment here, at least on the books, but in other liberal democracies, there are certain things that can't be said about Islam, about Muslims. You can't say those things, or you will be seriously, you will be arrested. Police will come to your house, or stuff about what defines a man and a woman, or something about abortion. In the UK, somebody stood outside, not blocking entrance, but just stood within a relatively short distance where they could observe and be seen, and prayed about people not having abortion, praying to God that people would turn away from abortion. And they were arrested. Not for They weren't even talking. They were praying. It was
Yeah.
literally they were literally being arrested for a thought crime, for what they were thinking, as opposed to anything that they were doing. I mean, it has gotten crazy because people don't understand that you can't have a free society, a liberal society, with while handing over to the government the power to police what people say. I mean, they're just totally inconsistent. But nobody, I mean, the people who are educated about this, who have thought about this in any way, it's just a tiny fraction of our voters. And I think it's the same in Canada and the
Oh,
UK and Australia, all these other places where there are now certain things that you can't say.
oh yeah. I mean, it's the UK just passed that law, and we're going to have a law passed. Luckily for us, we had two elections in the last little while, so this law just kept getting pushed over. But people still kept voting for the party that said they're going to put this law in, and it's the last version of it. You could face up to 6 months of house arrest and up to a $75,000 fine if the government thought that you might post something that might radicalize someone. Not that you did post something that did radicalize someone, but that you might, and what you post might radicalize someone. So then you could face house imprisonment and a $75,000 fine. So, you
And
know,
that law, I can guarantee you, will not be enforced in an even-handed and
nope,
neutral way.
nope,
The people that are favored by the government will be deemed to be protected by that law, and the people who are disfavored by the government will be the ones who will be prosecuted under that law, which is why that law and any similar law is so pernicious and dangerous to liberalism.
yep. Look, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been very generous. If you got any last words about your book, if you want to let people know where they can get a hold of you, if you send me any links, I'll include them in the description.
I'll be
Um,
happy to do that. Yes, I'll be happy to do that. And I very much appreciate your giving me the time to carry my message, however futile it might be, it might turn out to be, to carry my message out to your audience. I really do appreciate that. And I wish you luck with the podcast. As I was going to say before we started that, um, it's a little intimidating because I know the resumes of many of the people that you've had on, and you've had on some really serious people, people that I admire, who I've admired for years, like Robert Pandisco on education. He writes for commentary. I know of him. I've read his stuff. A very impressive guy. So I was a little intimidated, but I did my best, and I thank you very
oh,
much.
well, thank you, but I mean, it's just because I'm annoying and persistent. So finally, I think I chip away at people, and they agree to come on to keep me quiet.
Well, keep doing what you're
All
doing, and I will send you a link to my book.
right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening.